Hi, I'm Paule Pachter, the President and CEO of Long Island Cares, and welcome to another episode of Breaking Bread. This is our program where we introduce you to leaders in the nonprofit industry here on Long Island that are really tackling some very important issues. Before I introduce our special guest to you for this episode, I want to remind you that Breaking Bread is sponsored by Sands New York, bringing hospitality, entertainment, and retail experiences to the hub in Nassau County. Sands New York, welcome to the neighborhood. My guest today on Breaking Bread is Greta Guarton, a good friend and the president and CEO of the Long Island Coalition for the Homeless. Greta, welcome. It's so good to see you.
So great to see you too, Paul. Thank you.
Homelessness is a problem that many people don't equate with Long Island.
Absolutely.
They focus in on, the city, the 5 boroughs, people living, in park benches. But we've got a homeless problem in Nassau and Suffolk County. From your vantage point in the coalition, how significant is it and why is it happening?
Those are great questions. So around about 9,000 people are homeless over the course of a year in Nassau and Suffolk counties. Mm-hmm. It's, compared to New York City, that is not a significant number, mm-hmm. considering that we have some of the wealthiest areas of the country in Nassau and Suffolk counties. It is a very significant number. Any given night, it's around 3,900 folks that are homeless. Mm-hmm. Those are people that are living in emergency shelters, mm-hmm. Transitional housing for folks who are homeless, and unfortunately on the streets, in their cars, etc. The number one reason for homelessness is the lack of affordable housing. We have challenges here in Nassau and Suffolk counties. Some of the highest rents in the country are here. Mm-hmm. And even basic, minimum wage can't cover the cost of an apartment. It can't even cover an apartment. And those who are on disability just are never going to be able to afford something in Nassau and Suffolk counties mm-hmm. without some kind of subsidy.
Right. When you talk about affordable housing, and I hear other leaders in the nonprofit space, including myself, talk about the need for affordable housing, what would be the number that you would put on it?
So I think there's a couple of different types of affordable housing as we talk about, right? So, and they're typically based on the area median income. We hear a lot about affordable housing that is built for folks that are up to 120% of the area median income. Many of our staff probably mm-hmm. wouldn't be able to afford some of those units. Right. Then there's affordable housing units at 80%. Those are still mm-hmm. workforce, and 60%. That's workforce housing. A lot of those units are, if we can get them built, they are what are keeping our kids mm-hmm. in Nassau and Suffolk counties. Mm-hmm. They're keeping our nurses, they're keeping our firefighters, mm-hmm. they're keeping our police force and our teachers here. Even more affordable housing, usually that would need some kind of subsidies to support both the housing, the rent on the side of mm-hmm. folks who have disabilities, et cetera, and to be able to develop the housing using grants, et cetera, or somewhere in the vicinity of 30%
mm-hmm. Which is
of the area median income.
Well.
That's right. So that is Section 8, other HUD federal programs. Very often we're looking at those. But the truth is, any kind of mm-hmm. affordable housing eases up the housing stock for everybody, right? So it really helps everybody regardless of the level. Most of the folks we're serving are at 30, 40, 50% mm-hmm. of area median income, sometimes less. But any affordable housing is essential for our area.
And I see a lot of developments being opening up or being built, Wyandanch Rising and the program at the Ronkonkoma train station in Bayshore, and there's been housing in Rockville Center, but that's housing that corporations are developing. It's not individual landlords. And whether it's 10% put aside for affordable, as you said, there are varying degrees of affordable housing. So when people say, well, they should be able to find an apartment somewhere, even if it's in the basement of someone's home, well, we also have to talk about legal housing, because I remember during Superstorm Sandy, when we were doing work in Island Park, how many families were coming to pick up food, all living at the same address, and nobody knew that was going on. Talk to our audience actually, about the work of the Coalition for the Homeless. What does the organization do?
Long Island Coalition for the Homeless has a number of different programs. I think some of our most essential programs are case management and street outreach, working with folks who are living in emergency shelters or on the street, with the ultimate goal of getting them into permanent, affordable housing. Very often permanent supportive housing, which comes with additional case management and other kinds of supports. It can take years sometimes for folks to reach the point where they're ready for housing, or even sometimes on a waiting list, even they're ready for housing day one, but where there might be a unit that might be available to them. So another piece of what we do is we support other organizations, other nonprofits, in being able to access funds to build that affordable housing, and to run those kinds of programs. We also have a boutique and a pantry that serves Long Islanders in need. They do not have to be homeless. We provide food, toiletries, clothing, housewares, so that folks can also spend the money that they have on rent and things like that, which they can't always get support on. We can provide them with the other essentials so that they can focus on their costs on rent, et cetera.
And you're a regional planning organization, so you're actually working with a number of the organizations that provide the direct services to people who are homeless, whether they're people with disabilities, whether they're veterans. And I know there's great concern about homeless veterans here on Long Island and certainly across the country. How do you get your message out to politicians and elected officials about needing the money for more affordable housing, needing sound social policy that maybe looks at income levels and says, I know there's been a move right now, given the fact that we're in the middle of a presidential election, about creating more housing, making it more affordable for people, giving a family $25,000 to put down towards a down payment. But without the political will to say, I'm going to develop this housing, whether it's in the downtown area, whether it's in an industrial area here on Long Island, there's a lot of pushback when it comes to housing people who are homeless. And I think it's because people have misconceptions of who the homeless population is on Long Island. So how do you deal with, the system, the political system, the legislatures?
It's not an easy system all the time. So, Paul, one of the things that, when I think a lot of what you're speaking to really is the community opposition, and sometimes, very often, it's zoning laws, challenges of that type. There's funding. We could always use more funding, but there is funding available to develop affordable, high-quality housing with supports. The challenge is a lot of folks have there's a NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. A lot of folks have these misconceptions about who's homeless, who's in need, what the challenges are, who needs affordable housing, right? And I would say that we all need affordable housing. So very often it is educating members of the community, educating our elected officials, having constituents go and speak to their elected officials and let them know, I am among the folks who would be able to benefit from this housing. I said it at the start when we started talking. Very often it's nurses, it's teachers, firefighters. There's so many folks that could benefit from affordable housing. It's not just folks with disabilities, although it is them as well,
right? They're part of the mix, of course.
And you mentioned homeless veterans earlier on. There's a project in Southampton that was proposed. It was ready to be developed. A very exciting, wonderful program for low-income veterans and homeless veterans. And unfortunately, recently, the legislature decided, the council in Southampton they voted against it. I'm not sure where that sits now. I hope that they're going to continue to try to build that housing. Southampton and Suffolk County is one of the places in the country that has the most veterans.
Yeah.
So the idea that a town would shoot down much needed affordable housing for that population it's terrible. Really.
It's terribly disappointing when you have one township that's, as you said, shooting it down, and then you have another township in the town of Hempstead where Tunnel to Towers is able to move in. They're now going to level the old Long Beach Motel and build a housing development there, but embraced by the community because they understand these are our veterans. But people also need to understand that there are young families here on Long Island that are living in their cars.
I think that there's a lot of education that needs to be done. We really, and we try, we try to get the message out. We try to educate the communities. I think a lot of folks they don't see it or they don't understand. We hear too much, and I think a lot of it is disinformation about how it impacts schools and traffic and sewer systems. The impact in many cases, and in some cases these same arguments are made for housing that doesn't include housing for children.
Correct.
That doesn't include its actual walk for walkable neighborhoods. It's housing that's being built in downtown specifically so that folks don't need vehicles.
Correct.
But the same arguments are being made. Really what it comes down to, I think, is it's fear of the unknown. It's fear of who's going to be moving into our communities. And the truth is, we're here. Folks are here, and whether they're living in our communities in a nice, safe house or apartment, or they're living in their cars, or they're living in an emergency shelter, they're here. We are here.
It's interesting because people, have this fear that you talk about. And it's like, well, they're putting them into my neighborhood. No, wait a minute. These people are already in your neighborhood.
They're already here.
I hear the same thing when people say, how could there be so much food insecurity on Long Island? How come, they're not working? They are working. They just can't afford to put enough food on their tables. And the same thing is true with housing. They just don't have access to affordable housing. And what we're building now is lovely, and it's great for, young couples and young single professionals, but a family making $60,000, $70,000 a year and they have 2 kids, they can't get into that housing.
No, not and even higher than that sometimes, right?
$2,500 or $3,000 a month, it's too prohibitive.
You mentioned earlier Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, and folks living in basement apartments and other illegal apartments. Long Beach also, and Mastic, there were so many. I am not advocating for illegal apartments here, but there were a lot of folks that were living in illegal apartments, and when those houses got destroyed, those illegal apartments went away too. When they were rebuilt, they were no longer there. They did keep the average rental prices down a little bit, and if we were able to replace those illegal apartments with new, legal, appropriate, and safe apartments. First, folks would be safer. They would be on the tax rolls, all of the good things that we want. People would have a decent place to live. And it would, in fact, reduce prices across the board, right? Keep things a little bit more affordable.
And people would also
people can stay.
And
how many people are leaving, right?
Yeah.
How many folks are leaving Long Island because they can't afford to live here anymore?
That's been the age-old, cry from all of us. There's just not enough affordable housing. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, you can get a 1-bedroom apartment for less than $400. And now it's over $3,000. And it's hurting young people who are living at home with their families. They can't get out, to find a place on their own unless it's sort of dormitory style housing, which we've heard about, but haven't seen it yet.
It's hurting our communities, and it's also, I'll tell you something else, it's hurting our seniors. We have a lot of folks that, they're house rich, right? But Long Island is aging. On the whole, it's aging. And we have a lot of widows who you would be shocked at the number of women, specifically, men too, but mostly women, whose spouses have passed away. They had these homes. In some cases, they took reverse mortgages. In other places, they just couldn't continue with the taxes, and they lost their homes. And they are now in shelters.
And they don't have extended families that are looking to house them.
And in some cases, their families have moved to, south and other places because they can't afford to stay here.
Wow.
Right?
Tell me about the funding for the Long Island Coalition for the Homeless. How are you funded? How's the organization supporting itself?
The coalition is a nonprofit organization. A lot of our funding does come from the federal government. We oversee the continuum of care process in Nassau and Suffolk Counties. There's a little less than 500 COC communities across the country. And so some of our funding comes through there. When you mentioned the planning that we do, that's also through there. We are very fortunate to also have some state and local funding as well as foundations. And we have a number of amazing donors and volunteers who support our mission and the work that we do on a daily basis.
If somebody wanted to volunteer at the coalition or make a donation, how would they go about doing that?
We would love that. And the best way to do that is to reach out to us through our website, which is www.addressthehomeless.org. Our telephone number is 631-464-4314. The best extension there would be 113 or 125.
So addressthehomeless.org if you want to contribute to the Long Island Coalition for the Homeless. Look, there are 9,000 Long Islanders who are struggling to find affordable and secure and safe housing. And how lucky are we to have organizations like the Coalition for the Homeless and Greta Guarton to oversee the organization. So if you want to donate and support, addressthehomeless.org. Once again, I want to thank New York Sands for their sponsorship of this program, and I want to thank you for subscribing to Breaking Bread. So until next time, this is Paule Pachter, President and CEO of Long Island Cares. Go out and do something nice for someone. See you next time.